Hi everyone, it's Nick. Welcome back to my channel. Okay, in today's video, we are going to be talking about how to choose a color palette for your home, how to combine colors effortlessly. Maybe not effortlessly, it's gonna take some effort, but we're gonna get there together because color is complicated and people feel overwhelmed when trying to choose a color palette for their home. I super get it, and that's what we're gonna talk in this video. I did a video on color palettes a few years back. People loved it. I was just a wee little babe of 1,000 subscribers, and I made that video and people seem to really enjoy it, and I'm really proud of that video. But that video, I think, was very theoretical and lacked on some of the practicality. And so this video is going to be both. We're going to talk about the theory because you need to know that, but we're also going to talk about how practically you're going to take that theory and you're going to actually create a color palette that's going to make sense for you in your home. And trust me, you're going to be set by the time you're done this video. Maybe not set, I don't know, but like you'll know more than you did when you started. Okay, let's go from there. Okay, let's get going. Okay, first thing is going to be understanding mood. Okay, it matters a lot, and it's honestly the first stage for how you should begin the design process. Okay, so what is the mood that you're trying to create in your space? How do you want other people to feel when you're in your home, right? These are questions that you need to ask yourself. Do you want it to feel really like fun and energizing and interesting? In which case you want those big, bold, saturated colors. You might go for like hot pink, you might go for yellow, you might go for whatever, and that might make sense for like an office or a place that when you're there, you just feel like it's always fun and funky. If that's the mood you want to create, your colors are going to be a part of that conversation. If you want like calming and tranquil and like you want to feel really relaxed in your home and it's your sanctuary, well, you know what? You might go for more of your neutrals. You might go for greens and blues, and you might go for desaturated colors, not as energizing, something that's just a little bit more subtle and subdued. That might make sense for you. Or maybe you want something really like sexy and sophisticated, in which case you might go for darker colors, if that makes sense. So, you know, red wine, or you might go for like a deep purple, or you might go for black, or you might go for navy, right? These sorts of colors might make sense. So colors are going to dictate, or they're going to help dictate the mood that you're trying to create in your space. Start with the mood, and then the color palette will be informed by that. Okay, now let's talk about lighting, because lighting is really important when talking about colors. Now, I've done a ton of videos on lighting that I can link at the end of this video, but here's the deal. I'm not going to spend a whole ton of time talking about lighting because this is about color. The thing is about color to understand at this stage is that color is affected by light, whether that's natural light, daylight, evening light, artificial light, whatever. It changes. Color changes. We know that to be true, right? If you take a white wall and you put a warm light bulb next to it, it's going to look different than if you put a daylight bulb next to it. It's going to matter a lot. So color changes throughout the day. Color changes depending on if you have artificial light or you have natural light going there. It matters a lot. I would say when choosing something like paint, the easiest thing to do is to do test patches. People just want to say like, Nick, just I don't want to go to Benjamin Moore and stare at 5,000 paint swatches that are all look the same and they're all white. Just tell me which one I should choose. I hear you, I get you. I can't really do that. I can give you some ideas on what are good paint colors that I like. The reality is that the easiest thing to do is to buy a few, pick like 3. Don't overwhelm yourself with anything more than that because that's crazy. Pick 3, paint some paint swatches in different areas of your home and observe them throughout the day. They're gonna look different in the morning, they're gonna look different in the evening. Go with that. That will give you a much better idea on how the light is going to change your colors throughout the day. That is gonna be a lot easier than necessarily just always working from a paint swatch, which is usually gonna leave you more confused than when you started. So get them on your actual wall, because what works on my wall, like this is the same paint color that I had in my old apartment. It looks way different here because my old apartment had way more natural light than this one. So it's just different. So you might want to choose different paints that are going to make sense for your space with different versions of different light coming throughout the day. I know it's confusing, but just at some point you just got to hold your nose and jump. Okay, so more theory, color theory. Let's talk about color temperature. So what is color temperature and why does it matter? Well, color temperature is really the divide between sort of warmer colors and cooler colors. So warmer colors tends to be those kind of those yellows, those reds, those oranges, things like that. Blues and greens and maybe those blue tinged grays and things. The purples even, those tend to be your cooler colors. So that matters because you can choose to have a color scheme that's maybe a little bit on the warmer side. You can choose to have one that's on the cooler side, or you can try to go for something balanced that incorporates both. If you take something like a Japandi color scheme, that is a color scheme that typically has a lot of warm woods, but it also balances that with sort of blue-gray concrete. So it's very balanced in that sense. Well, some people choose to have really kind of deep, sophisticated blue, sort of moody sort of spaces, and they go for much darker or cooler colors, and it tends to make a space sometimes feel really sophisticated and really moody, which can be really lovely as well. So both types of color can make sense. Both have a place in your home. You don't necessarily just have to choose warmer or cooler. You can choose a balance of both, but it's important to understand the difference between the two. And the main thing to understand here is how color temperature affects mood, right? Those warmer colors tend to be a little bit more energizing. Those cooler colors tend to be a little bit more relaxing, right? That's why we like to have sort of little blues and grays that we see a lot in nature. It can can feel really relaxing and calming, while if you take something like bright yellow or orange, it can sometimes feel a little bit very active and energizing in a space. It can make you alert and awake. That's why you see it all the time in places like, I don't know, McDonald's play places or kids' playgrounds, or that's why you see it in like offices, right? Because they're trying to keep people alert, and that's why those really bright colors can do that. Well, you might see blue and greens in places like spas because they're trying to make people relaxed, right? So that's the sort of nature of color theory, and it can affect the mood that you're trying to create. Okay, and now we come to my favorite topic, which is hues, tints, tones, and shades, which if you've seen a nicklewis color video, you know that I cannot go a video without talking about tints, tones, and shades. Let's talk about what a primary hue is. A primary hue is just colors that you would know, right? Think your primary color. Think like your blues, your greens, your purples, oranges, yellow, red, whatever, right? As you know it to be the primary sort of color. And a tint just means that you're adding white to that. So if you start taking, something a color like green and you add a lot of white to it, it just feels really like fresh and really light. And it might actually get to a point where it starts to feel like a white paint or a white color with just a little bit of a green undertone to it, right? So that's what a tint is. You're just adding white to green. If you add black, it starts to get really moody, really dark, and it just basically gets to the point when it nearly looks black, but it might have black with a little bit of a green undertone, right? So we're just moving more towards that darker color. Gray is of course just a mix of black and white. Well, what does gray do, you might ask? Because how can you get darker and lighter at the same time? All it does is it starts to make that color look really desaturated. So things that look really dusty, right? Oftentimes when you add that gray, it sometimes looks a lot more pleasing to the eye than some of those big bright primary colors in interior design. Now that might be different for graphic design or whatever, but for interior design, those colors oftentimes might make more sense for most people in their homes. And then of course you can add a mix of gray, white, and black in there, and all those different combinations is what makes the sort of infinite amount of colors that you see at Benjamin Moore, because they've basically added all these different sort of colors together. So a color might look a certain green or blue or gray or whatever, but it might have all these different undertones and a mix of all these different colors put in. And that's really what's important there, is just understanding that where a color is on the color wheel, just in theory, just helps you sort of identify that color and how they can play off of each other and sort of where they sit to really just understand where those undertones are, because that's going to matter when you start to combine these colors together. Okay, and the next theory. This is the last part of the theory part, okay? So you're almost through the Nick takes you back to school phase, and that is undertones, okay? So I kind of mentioned it here with the tints, tones, and shades. What is undertones? Well, this matters a lot when you're dealing with things like white paint and black, and those neutral paints especially, matters a lot in interior design. All that's really saying is what are those underlying tones that are in there? So something might appear to be a certain color, but when you actually break it down, it might start to have little bits of different color underneath. So you might picture a bucket of white paint, pure white. And then you take a little like eyedropper and you just put in like a little, half dozen drops of yellow paint. It's probably still gonna look pretty white. Okay, it's not gonna look yellow. It's because it's a whole bucket of paint, okay? So we're just got a little bit of the yellow in there. It's not gonna make a massive difference, but it'll start to change it a little bit from what it once was. It'll start to have a little bit of warmth to it. It'll have a little bit of yellow. And that's really what's happening when we're talking about undertones in white paint. When someone says it's a white paint with yellow undertones, that's what they're saying. Or even warm undertones. See what we talked about with color temperature. We're seeing some sort of blend of yellows, oranges, reds, whatever, that is making it a little bit on the warmer side. And that is what is making the Benjamin Moore color wall so overwhelming, because there are thousands of colors, because there are all these different paints with these slight little bits of undertones of different colors in there. And that matters a lot when you're trying to combine colors, because if you've got a home that's got creams and beiges or whatever, and you're trying to pick a white, and you're like, should I pick Oxford white or Simply white, or should I pick Chantilly lace or whatever, you're starting to take into account how much lighting you have in the space. Depending on how much light is in the space, that's going to matter a lot. And also, if you've got those warmer undertones in your flooring and your couch, and you've got that in some of your decor pieces, whatever, and you've got sort of those really warmer tones, you may want to select a warmer toned paint. So you might choose white, but you might want to choose a white with those warmer undertones to match the rest of the design and the rest of the things that you've chosen for the space. So that's what that's about. A lot of people get confused with undertones. I've heard people say white is white. White is just pick a white paint. It doesn't matter. Hey, amateur hour, it does matter, because combining these colors makes a big difference. The easiest also thing to do is take a sheet of paper and take that color swatch and compare the two of them together, or compare them against each other. And you start to see, when you go to Benjamin Moore and you look at Chantilly lace, which is kind of their purest, most neutral white, it's the brightest white they have, and you start to compare it with Oxford white, it starts to look a little blue-gray. When you compare it to Cloud white, it starts starts to look a little creamy, a little yellow. And that's those undertones that are working out play. Also, again, you know, using something like a color picker tool, which you can get on the internet to be able to start to sort of see where it places on the color wheel, also really helps you identify the different undertones of the different paints or colors that you're looking at in your home. Okay, so that's the theory. Let's get to how to practically choose a color palette, because, okay, you understand the mood that you're trying to create in the space. You understand what you're trying to do. You understand the light that you're having, and you understand the basics of tints, tones, and shades, and undertones. Fantastic, okay? So now when you're trying to get inspiration for what you're trying to do in your home, the easiest thing to do is to start to take something like some inspiration, whether that's gonna be an inspirational image on the internet, could be a wallpaper you like, it could be a rug that you love, it could be a piece of art that you enjoy, some decor piece, something that you see in your space, something you want to incorporate in the space, and you want to look at all the different colors that are at play there and pull those colors out and to develop a little bit more of a complete, well-rounded color palette. So here, for example, I've got this wallpaper that I'm going to show you here. This wallpaper is super, super cool. I just got this wallpaper sample and I think it's beautiful. And let's take a look at some of the colors that are happening in this wallpaper as a practical example for you. It's ultimately, you might see this and go like, okay, it's a green wallpaper. True, there's lots of different varieties of green here, right? And again, this is here to show you the different tints, tones, and shades that are happening, because you've got greens that are quite dark, right? In that background, you've got that really sort of dark forest green that's happening there, but you've also got some really like light minty green. You've also got some white, arguably I would say has a little bit of a green undertone, some mid-tone greens, a wide variety of greens that are happening here. Again, incorporating all those different variations of not just green, they all read as green, we would all say they're green, but there's little bits of white in there, there's gray in there, there's black in there, there's all those different sort of tints, tones, and shades that are happening within green. This gives us space to play with all sorts of different types of green in the rest of our palette, which is fantastic, because this wallpaper is your jumping off point, this is your inspiration, but now we can start to play with lots of different types of green in the space, which is great. There's also a lot more happening here. You got this sort of pinky, sort of terracotta, could almost be like a red, right, that you're seeing here. And maybe even a little bit of charcoal in there, like that dark green almost is reading as a charcoal to me, actually. So I think you can have some space here to play with some black or some darker colors. But that terracotta is really, really cool, right? And there's lots of, again, different sort of tints and tones that are happening within that sort of red color scheme. So you might look at that and say the primary hue might be red, but once we add a lot of gray in there, now it's starting to look more like that sort of chestnutty sort of terracotta, maybe has a little bit of brown in there, right? So you got all that different color that you're able to sort of play with within this color scheme, which I think is really cool. And you also got a little bit of yellow. It's not a bright yellow, this isn't a canary yellow, this isn't banana yellow, this is sort of a little bit more of like the color, I don't know, of wheat. You know, so there's lots of different kind of yellowish, brownish tones that are happening in this, which is really, really cool. So definitely some place to play with some of those dustier, sort of desaturated sort of yellow tones in the rest of the palette. So here we're gonna create a palette that just incorporates in lots of different tints, tones, and shades, pulling some of these colors that are happening from this jumping off point. And you can start to see that we're not just choosing a color, we're not just taking green and we're copy pasting it everywhere in the room, because that's gonna read as really one note. It's not gonna be blended, it's not gonna be harmonious, it's just gonna feel really matchy-matchy and kinda not great. It's not gonna read particularly sophisticated. But once we start to play with all these different tints, tones, and shades, and we understand what's happening in the color palette, you can start to pull in lots of different colors that are really fun. You know, look at this like fur color here. Like, how cool is this? This is a really nice, interesting material. And this is going to kind of be similar to that sort of wheat color that we talked about in the, that we're pulling from that wallpaper, which is cool. Your paint could be like a darker green, but we've also got a bit of a white here that makes sense, I think, for this. Now you've got warmer tones and cooler tones happening here in this wallpaper, which I think opens up the possibility of using both, which I think is really, really cool in terms of the undertones of what you want to use for white. But you also got all these different terracotta tones, which again kind of read brown to me a little bit. So you can start to play with really cool brown leathers or different sort of brown tones that you want to use in the rest of the palette. And you're seeing here that we're taking that core palette that we saw originally in that wallpaper, pulling out all those different colors, and then starting to expand the palette into something that will make sense for the whole home or the whole space, right? So you could have pillows that are being done in a fabric that is similar to this. You could do a rug that is maybe in a color that is similar to what you're seeing in the rest of this palette, right? You're using this as inspiration, as a jumping off point for those paint colors or for the decor elements that you have in the space or the other pieces of furniture, right? So this is where you start to create a more well-rounded palette. We're not just choosing one color or two or three and using that exact tone, because that's where people get wrong. They're scared of like, okay, I picked navy blue, so I gotta pick navy blue everywhere. And it's like, well, no, we're actually using this inspirational image, or in this case, wallpaper, and we're using that to create a palette that feels more well-rounded and much more sophisticated, giving lots of varieties in texture and tone that is gonna make for a really, really beautiful space. Now, from here, you might also say, well, what if I don't wanna use wallpaper? What if I wanna use something digital? Well, using digital mood boards is also a fantastic way to do this as well. Couple of tools I recommend. I think I really like Milanote. I've been using Milanote for years. I love their stuff. They're not sponsoring, I'm just saying I really like their stuff. I've used them for a very long time. And it's great to incorporate images. They have a pin extension, kind of like Pinterest, if you've used Pinterest, where you can like take any image from any website in the, well, on the internet. I was gonna say in the world, that is the internet. And you can like pin images and you can send them to a specific board. You can start to style something that makes sense for yourself. Also, I really like just pick a color picker tool from Chrome. Just go, it's a Chrome extension. If you've never used those, you can go to the Chrome extension store and just search color picker. I don't know which, there's a bunch of them on there, go pick one. And what you can do is you can actually hover your little eyedropper and you can choose different colors that you see in different images, and you can start to get a bit of an approximation for where it sits on the color wheel, which again, I really find helpful. You can go to Canva or any of these other tools and pop that hex code that you're gonna get from that color picker tool. I'm not saying you need to sit there with your color wheel to necessarily always design your palette, but I just think it's important to understand the theory of where that color sits, because it's gonna make a huge difference in terms of understanding the color and what's happening in your space. So I would say, practically speaking, look for that inspiration. Find those inspirational images that you see on the internet. Find a piece of art, wallpaper, a rug, whatever you find interesting. Lots of different colors that really speak to you. And then you can start pulling out those colors in really interesting ways, expanding the palette beyond that sort of inspirational piece to come up with something really well-rounded and interesting. And that to me is gonna get you miles better than just sort of picking a color or walking in blindly to shops and just like buying and throwing stuff in a cart and hoping for the best. Because that's not, I think that's where people go a little bit wrong. But this way I think is a great way to sort of practically create a color palette that's gonna make sense for you. So that's it for today, guys. I hope you really enjoyed this video. I'm gonna link here to two different videos. One I'm gonna link to is my lighting video that I have done before, because I think it's gonna really help you here. And the other one is the original video that I did several years ago, so you can see little baby Nick and how he did several years ago. I focused a little bit less on the practical stuff, but I think you're still gonna get some value out of that one. So go check that out one too, and I will see you on the next one. Thank you, bye-bye.